Good afternoon. Hopefully all is well with you. Let's call this meeting to order. It is 4:04 on Monday, February 10th, 2025. Christine, if you can handle the roll call, please.
Sure. MK Sadiq,
Present.
Ann Halbrecht,
Here.
Pamela Garvey,
Present.
Kayla McCoy,
Here.
Nikki Smith,
Present.
Connor Kerrigan. All right, a quorum is present. You may proceed.
And Connor is joining us now. So let's go ahead and begin. Uh, on the agenda today are two items. But first, we don't have any minutes to approve. Is that correct, Christine?
That's correct. I'll be sure that I have minutes for last week's meeting and this week's meeting ready for your approval at the meeting. I guess it's February 24th, since next week is President's Day.
That's right. That's right. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. All right. So the two things that we need to just touch on today is a discussion around a scoring rubric for the nominee application and scheduling a time to interview semifinalists. Let me just begin by asking a simple question. How many of you have experience with developing scoring rubrics? Because then we can kind of good. We can so then what I'd like is to have a conversation that has a lot of input from Pam and Ann. Everyone else can certainly participate because we're all thinkers. We can all contribute, so let's not remove ourselves from the conversation just because we hadn't constructed one before, but instead be thoughtful about how this might be a meaningful experience, as well as the number one thing. Whenever we're creating a document or scoring a document, it has to be legible to all parties concerned. And in this case, there's a higher responsibility to ensuring that people can get feedback from us so that they can develop a better poet laureate application in the future. And legibility in this case means that we're able to clearly communicate the deficiencies of an application as well as the parts of the application that's excellent, right? And also, we should enter into this moment by considering one main factor. This is subjective. There's nothing objective about it. I wish it could be, but there's no sort of magic that we can conjure to make it objective. So ultimately, this is based on our expectations. This is based on our aesthetics, our own principles and values as it relates to what we consider artful and beautiful and things of that nature. And I think acknowledging that from the beginning helps us to better come to terms with the scores that we may have, because what is true for one person may not be true for another, and that's completely fine. All right. So I wanted to just acknowledge those factors before we enter into the conversation. Let's begin. Pam, I know part of your back, I would assume, let me just say that, I would assume part of your background when it comes to scoring rubrics may be from like an educational space.
Yeah, I mean, that's the majority of it, but some other spaces as well. But yeah, I
Okay, well,
mean,
let's
I
talk.
deal with rubrics all the time educationally. Yeah.
Cool. So let's start with you. Let's begin by talking about what you think is an effective rubric under the circumstances. We're talking about individuals who will submit an application, and within this application, there are several things that they need to make sure they kind of check the box on, right? Um, what sort of rubric, would you recommend for a space like this? Not to put the spotlight on you so quickly out the gate, but I feel like you can handle it for some strange reason. I might be wrong, but please just let me know.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think a successful rubric has a very direct connection to, in this case, the list of qualifications that would be put out there. I think it would go into a little more detail than that. But I think that would be so anybody looking at it could see there's this seamless connection between, oh, here's a list of qualifications, and then here are some specific items on the rubric that connect to this qualification, this qualification, this qualification that are listed, right? So I think we'd want to have that clear. I think we'd want to make sure that the rubric focuses, I mean, this is just based on my own experience, but focused on the positive. In other words, focused on what it is that we're aiming for, right? Not something punitive, but something, sort of celebratory of excellence, right? So we'd want to maybe think about that in the wording. I also think a good rubric has sort of questions for us to consider that are broad enough to allow for things that we can't necessarily predict, right? So we don't want to be, making things so narrow, right, that somebody applies and we haven't even accounted for, oh, you know what? We didn't even think about this type of poetry, or we didn't even think about this kind of a background in terms of connections to the community. So we want to make sure that also it's not too prescriptive, I guess, is the way I would think about it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And let's open this conversation up to you. What are your thoughts, especially based on what Pam had to offer and then your own experiences?
Yeah, of course, my experience is based on in the arts grant making world, and I concur with everything that Pam said. I think what we would want to do is look back at the elements of the application that reflect the review criteria and the expectations of the post. But yeah, I think we want to make it exactly what she said, broad enough yet focused enough, easy to understand for anybody, for us to understand as we're rating them, and then for the general public to understand if anybody wants to look at the work we did.
Totally. So let's think about that then. You mentioned the word rating. So at some point we will have to get to the scoring of it, right? And also let me just say that Nikki, Connor, Kaylin, as well as you, Christine, if there's anything that you want to add to this part of it, certainly feel free. But I just want to say one thing before we open it all the way up. It sounds like if we're focusing on, let's say, the positive, it would be something like a good, better, best, right? So under good would be a description of what is a good application, a better application, and a best. That way it stays on the positive side. Is that fair to say it like that or to think about it in those terms? Okay. The next thing is thinking about some sort of score. So essentially we would have to assign a score to good, better, and best. Do we want to leave? What is your experience in terms of leaving space for the decimal point, right? So let's say if we assigned good as 1, better as 2, and best as 3 to have the 2.5. Is it useful to break out to one decimal place if necessary, just so that we can avoid uh, the likelihood of a tie? All right. Okay. Listen, I know this can be abstract for everybody else. Let me just open it up. Hey, Nick, do you have any thoughts on what we're talking about so far?
Yeah, I actually I've been trying for like 6 minutes to post this screenshot of a rubric that I've actually seen in the past and have used. It's more so for students, but the rubric in and of itself is the Likert score, right? And so you have 1 through 5, and this is what examples of a 1,
Mhm.
examples of a 2, examples of, and so forth. And so I'm gonna get this together.
If if
Just give me
if you could
one.
send this to, I don't know, if you could send this to
Yeah, I've
Christine.
been trying to paste it, and I just had to save the image to my computer and then I can upload it. I've just been struggling.
No, it's a struggle kind of day. So let me just say this. Do we want to have a 5-point rating or a 3-point rating? Which one seems to be more useful? Obviously, with the 5-point rating, we might have scores that puddle around the 3 because 3 is safe. It's not so bad. It is not excellent, right? And that's fine because when we do see the truly so-called excellent score, okay, we have something from Nikki that's posted in the chat. Cool. So we'll get to that in just a moment. We do see that. So let's kind of discuss it. 3 points, 5 points. I'm certainly open to either. I think that 5 creates more nuance, more dimensions to consider. Um, and perhaps that's fairer given the circumstance. But I don't know, it also creates complication, right? A more complex way to score it. Connor, let me go to you. What are your thoughts about the conversation that we're having so far?
Uh, I would on initial blush, I am partial to a 5-point system. For the reasons that you listed, I just think it creates a little more breadth of consideration. I think a 3-point system is a little narrower and like I don't know, that doesn't offer, like you said, a lot of nuance. And since this is a subjective thing, which we've admitted to, I think giving ourselves a wider variety, a better ability to consider the full breadth of something. A 3-point system seems highly simplified. I think the breadth of submissions we will receive cannot be easily categorized into a 3-point system. So I'm partial to 5.
Totally fair. Absolutely. Caitlin, any thoughts from you?
I agree with the 5-point thing for all those same reasons, especially because of stuff like poetry. There's the creative aspect, there's the technical aspect, there are all these different parts that come into play. And I just like 3 might not be enough to cover all of those bases.
So Christine offered a great example. Christine, would you be willing to, or is it appropriate for us for you to share a screen regarding the rubric?
Yeah, give me just a moment and I will do that.
Okay. And by the way, as we stream, I will have probably a little guest join us. She likes to steal the show, and she just needs some time.
Can you all see that? Okay.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, just an example, and it is a 5-point system. Or more than that, and then below it has explanations of how you score, and obviously some of these will be similar to what we've asked, but I think, yeah, the qualifications and criteria is what we want to definitely look at, and then whatever else the task force is interested in adding.
That looks good to me. Maybe we can use this as a basis for what we have to submit.
This is a little fuzzy for me. Like I get it, but it seems like a lot to hmm. Hmm. I don't know.
What we may need to do is because I don't think we'll come to a concrete decision today. But the good news is we'll have about a week in between to kind of flesh out what a rubric could look like. And then based on that time, we can do some additional work. So, but I think this gives us a good starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I would remind you of is the let's see, the timeline. So if we open the process on Friday, then, and you wanted the rubric to be published with the process, then we would need that by Friday.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. So then let's then consider maybe a timeline for getting it done so that we can have the rubric available by Friday, maybe via email. So maybe some work that way so we can get a draft on page and then we can kind of bounce the draft. We can share the document and then we can bounce the draft until we get a solid view of it, a solid view of what the rubric could be. How about that as a possible way to move forward? We get the draft on page, we work on it via this shared mechanism, and then hopefully have a final draft ready by Friday for publication.
When you say draft, does that mean we have categories and scale of scoring, and then we just kind of fill in the blanks of examples of what that score could mean? Just trying to get a feel for how much do we think we can get done together, because I would imagine trying to do this independently and have it represent, I don't know, it just, I worry about us not meeting the goal of getting it done by Friday. So I wonder if there's something like at least we can land on, categories. Are we talking like in the example of the picture, form, poetic language, content, creativity, overall impact? Are those the things, or other things the things? So maybe that's some decisions we can come to. That way it's not so fuzzy when we're trying to work independently.
What's going to be important to you? Great. That's a great point. What's going to be necessary is what Pam had lifted up before, is that the criteria that we're publishing, that has to be visible on the form itself. We can't just kind of go into a different space. So we'll have to use the criteria as the basis for how we'll score it. Pam, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I see that it looks like Google Docs is used, and I do not have a Google account. That's
Okay.
an intentional choice not to have a Google account.
I totally understand. That's also fair. Thank you. All right. Then I think we have our work cut out for us. So thank you so much, Christine, for working ahead here. I think we have our work cut out for us then for the day. Let's focus on drilling this down. We may need to figure out. Well, I guess we'll have to try to do all the things. Okay, we got 40 minutes. Let's make it happen. All right. So here are the qualifications on our screen. Again, thank you, Christine. 21 years of age, that's more of a checkbox. St. Louis City resident checkbox. Be committed to bringing poetry in a wide range of places and people. That's going to be interesting in terms of making that into a criterion. Be able and available to reach St. Louis audiences. Provide evidence of achievement in the art of poetry, including having a body of publicly accessible work, books, literary magazine, and/or digital media. Be poised to undertake the public role required of the poet laureate. It looks like the most robust criterion is provide evidence of achievement in the art of poetry. So that gives us some space to kind of create multiple dimensions for scoring. Anybody have any thoughts about that particular section? Or for the overall document. Just want to make sure that I'm okay.
If it's helpful and I get some guidance, I can go through and look through the qualifications and the criteria and share a proposed rubric. If you all can give me a bit of guidance on what you want to have weighted more heavily. Like obviously, if you're 21 or over, that's probably a point.
Yeah, it almost sounds like we're talking about two different things. Like we're talking about, to your point, Christine, we're talking about screening criteria, which is like blanket qualifications. As you went through them, MK, anything that we can kind of check the box on, that's just a screening criteria. I think a scoring rubric is different in that we're scoring the bodies of work, which are probably the more robust bullets. So I don't know that we need necessarily scoring or a rubric for any of the qualifications per se, more so just the body of work and how we score it.
Right. So then this section that is the selection criteria have a record of quality published or documented work, ability and willingness to conduct the public engagement duties of the office, demonstration of excellence in their artistic work as evidenced by originality, mastery of skills and technique, potential impact on the audience and or community, possess the ability to foster and advance poetry and literary arts throughout the region via readings, public presentations, teaching in diverse communities, agree to the conditions and term of appointment. All right. So yeah, some of these, even in the selection criteria, has a check the box sort of feel. But again, there's some areas that can be teased out that effectively could become that. Useful for like, creating a rubric. All right. So here's what I'm thinking. This is complicated work. Uh, and we'll need to figure out a way forward. Let's see. Okay, Pam, you have an idea. I see 4 areas: recognition of their work, quality of work, the interior areas of public engagement. Okay. Any thoughts on what Pam posted?
Mhm.
Certainly that's a good beginning point for ironing
Mhm.
out a rubric.
Agree.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So recognition of their work, quality of work, 2 areas of public engagement. In terms of public engagement, what might we say there to make it a bit more concrete?
So one of them feels very clear to me, possess the ability to foster and advance poetry, that one. Um, the screen share just disappeared from me, but that one feels very clear to me, because we could look at somebody's history of doing those things within the community, and if it's relevant in other communities, but certainly within this community. The part about like conducting the duties or I'm not sure how it's worded. I feel like that's something we need to maybe have a clear sense of for us and for applicants.
Do we remember the specific language on that? On the other point that Pam raised?
I'm gonna reshare. I don't know what happened. I hit something and it disappeared, but I'm resharing right now.
I think that was my bad. I think I was trying to work with this whiteboard and I accidentally
Oh, I
did
was like,
something. I'm
what's
sorry.
whiteboard?
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
yeah. Am I in the correct spot in the document that you all need?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, it's that second bullet, ability and willingness to conduct the public engagement duties of the office.
Yeah.
That seems a little different than what we're saying with possess the ability to foster and advance poetry, et cetera. But I think it's clearly an important criteria that we need to. There's something because there is something about there's a minimum number of events that like outreach events and things like that. So it seems like that's what we're talking about is somebody's ability to do that. Whether that's proven record or similar or parallel types of things they've done.
Yes. Yes, I can see that point.
Like, I don't think we need to put in agree to the conditions in term of appointment. Like, that's not something we're going to score.
No.
And then I think the other thing we need to decide, like if we can parse those 4 out using some of that same language, but maybe also like refining it a little bit or making it more specific if we want, or more broad if we want. Figuring out, is it the same number of points for each of those categories? Or do we think they need to be scored differently in some way? Or some of them, in other words, do we think of some of them as more valuable?
Wonder if we should at first look at what we're going to score and then go back and see how those should be weighted. I think it'll be easier to do that way.
Yeah.
I know that when we put the criteria out for the applications at RAC, we will like outline each of those areas, like you just did, Pam, the recognition of the work, the quality of the work, and 2 areas of public engagement. And then we'll say underneath those, like as evidenced by, and some of those points can ladder up underneath those 3 points if we agree on those 3 points.
Yeah, I think I like that idea of as evidenced by. I think the rack application is one of like the clearest and most precise. That still leaves a lot of room for different types of creatives, and I think aiming for something like that would be good.
Good deal. Good deal.
Should we wordsmith it now?
Yes. So we have at least the 2 areas that you've identified, and then the 2 areas of public engagement. As noted, one of those areas sound pretty straightforward. I guess the 4th not being as clear, and that is ability and willingness to conduct public engagement duties of the office. That's correct, right? That's what we're going to wordsmith.
Yeah.
All right.
If it's okay with all of you, I think I'll just take some notes underneath here and know that it's not part of the website that needs to be updated, but that I can add to the rubric.
That sounds good to me.
I mean, it could say something like for the rubric, applicant has demonstrated the ability and willingness to conduct the public engagement duties of this office. And we could use that phrase that you brought up, as evidenced by.
Can you repeat that, Pam? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Applicant has demonstrated the ability and willingness to conduct the duties of the office as evidenced by. And then do we want to give like examples of what that could be?
I think we should, in terms of examples, because for the poet who doesn't have necessarily a public role, they'll have to think about what in their experience and their histories would have prepared them for this public role and be able to
Right.
share that, right?
Right.
So that means maybe the poet who had to offer a poem for the moment, right? They were maybe either commissioned or they were asked to share a work that's appropriate for an occasion. What other moments like that? Perhaps they, again, commission work, especially for organizations, institutions, or individuals, but commission work, works that reflect a moment or stamp a moment in time. Are there other like public facing moments that a poet would have to address in their duties and in what they do? What are some other examples?
Would we consider somebody who writes about issues that are particularly relevant to the St. Louis community? Would that be something that would fall under this part of the rubric, or would we not think of that
I
as
think that's strangely limiting, you know.
okay?
For the poet who does not think specifically about, and when we say issues, because these, you know, these words have multiple
Right,
meanings depending
connotations.
on communities. I don't know if we'd want to go there, just because I feel like it might cause some people to take themselves out of the running because they never wrote a poem and publicly shared it about St. Louis or the greater metropolitan area, you know?
Yeah.
Are you all interested in the possibility of public engagement having a broader definition in terms of the person is obviously a poet, but maybe they've engaged in community work in a different way.
That's challenging. There are plenty of people who've done community work, but very few of them have had the opportunity to give voice to the moment. You know what I mean? And there's a
Yeah.
special responsibility that goes to that. It's almost like being, yeah, again, it's just it's being asked to speak. It's being asked to let's say if we were talking about, houses of worship, it would be like offering a prayer. It's something like that that's like big and it's centered on their voice and their words. And they've had the privilege to do it, or the moment to do it. Whereas, let's say if somebody were volunteering, I can imagine someone thinking about volunteerism. Perhaps they did something at some sort of community fair, and they did some volunteer hours. Maybe they volunteered as a mentor. So I think that's very limited and specific to a context that doesn't speak to anything that they would experience as a poet laureate. But that's just my thoughts. What are some other thoughts on this?
I like what you've written here, Christina, about example of using words in a public setting. I think because the language there opens a lot of doors. I mean, historically, I've participated and seen a lot of people here participate in things like, get out the vote and stuff like that, where people come and are asked to read their poems that may or may not be directly relevant to that. But the whole idea is like a voter drive in St. Louis. Um, so that was big for a while. I don't know about post-COVID, but that was like a big event for a while, every few years. And that would be an example of like words in a public setting. Um,
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I like that. Any other examples that we'd like to offer up, or is this adequate?
so what were some of the other duties of the office though? Isn't there something like the person has to do is it 4 events in a 12-month?
But
Uh,
that would be a responsibility of theirs as the laureate, not really, that wouldn't really be anything we would grade them upon, right?
No, but it says participate in at least 4 literary events and 4 educational programs in schools in the region. And that would be one of the duties. And so would we include educational things in
Oh, I see
ways
what
that
you're
they show
saying.
their willingness and ability to meet the duties of this position if
Mhm.
part of the position is educational programs in schools in the region? In other words, like people who've maybe done things like for National Poetry Month uh, it could even be like grade schools or whatever in St. Louis City, right? Or
I agree with you, Pam, because when my mind was turning to the aspect of the poet as educator when we were when we first entered this part of the conversation.
mhm. Yes. So then perhaps let's add a bullet for that, or is that like its own?
yeah,
Yeah,
I would
let's
put it.
add
No,
a
I'd
bullet.
put it in here
You put it in there?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
because I think some people might have both of these things, but some people might only have one, and they might be a wonderful candidate who's only had one of these two types of opportunities, but that's showing their engagement with part of the duties, and maybe it wouldn't be that much of a stretch for them to do the other.
Which bullet point do you want that under here?
Under the where you're writing in the blue. Yeah. Added as another bullet point, examples um, of educational or participating, I guess, in educational activities focused on poetry.
Yeah, that's broad. I like that. That way you could be the facilitator, you could be the guest speaker, uh,
Mhm.
the guest presenter. You could be the model, so to speak, where you're offering poems, but not necessarily the one who's teaching per se.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways that you can engage in an educational experience that a person might find themselves in. So that's appreciated. Uh, okay. Well, we have three. Do we need more?
I think that's good.
Okay.
Because I think even if somebody, that could spur them to think of something that doesn't, a particular poet, to think about something that's not exactly one of those things, but certainly something that is akin to that.
Sure. That's all that matters. We don't necessarily want them to feel excluded. We just want them to think about particular experiences that would be relevant for this role. So
So should we have something like, as evidenced by activities like, and then have the bullet points, so this way they realize that they're not limited to those, like it spurs them and it gives them ideas, but somebody could have something that's
Yep.
different, would show us this, and they don't feel like, oh, I can't put that down.
yep. Yep.
Okay. So then, I think the other one that's public outreach kind of stuff is a lot more straightforward, because if we look at the bullet here, really the applicant has demonstrated the ability to advance poetry, and then we could say, as evidenced by activities such as readings, presentations, teaching, etc.
It looks good. One thing I want to return to. So again, she's offered to begin to um, format a rubric for us to kind of kickstart the conversation. Now, Pam, I know that for various reasons you're not doing Google documents like that. However, she can easily just download the document and just attach it, and then you can mark it up that way and offer your thoughts that way.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
that's excellent. Great.
Now, I have a question here about this one. So is there a difference between doing those reading presentations and teachings yourself as a nominee, um, and organizing those types of activities?
I think so.
Yes. Yes. I think there's a difference.
And I
And-
think they should both be things people would consider talking about. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it could be organizing and or participating in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much of this role has like a self-starter aspect to it.
Mhm.
You have to have initiative, and if they wait around for someone else to organize the event or the activity, then that poet may not actually engage anyone. So some of this is about, I would imagine, and we can discuss this a bit more, but I would imagine this is about the poet's ability to start and lead an activity, an effort of some kind. Um, that will enrich the region when it comes to advancing poetry or the literary arts in general. So, but it's tough because not everybody has event planning experience or or event producing experience. I guess, anyways, that's tricky. That's tricky.
Well, that's why I like it, because it says organizing and or
Right.
participating in. Because I think that you'll find that typically it's a poet that's like, well, hell, I'm gonna, excuse my language, but
Yes, sir.
heck, I'm gonna get together a bunch of, I know some great writers and poets, and let's start a series.
Yep.
Mhm.
And I
Absolutely.
was just gonna ask, are we talking about stuff that's only in person? Because I know a lot of poets who have put together some great efforts that are online, like especially post-COVID, like they would do virtual slam sessions or stuff like that. I think that stuff should count too.
I do too.
Yeah,
Excellent point.
absolutely.
Kaylin, the addition I made, does that help solidify what you were?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay, cool, thanks.
What else do we need to consider here? Or did we cover everything? Cover everything? What are some lingering concerns?
So the one thing that we haven't covered yet with our bullet here is it says in diverse communities.
Mhm.
I think we need something that addresses that. Um,
Well, if we're really talking about the heart of why people discuss doing things in diverse spaces, is sometimes that an individual represents one group, whether it's uh, gender, race, religious, sexual orientation, whatever the case may be, and as a result, never think about or feel comfortable going to other spaces. How do you capture that? Like, how do you say that?
right.
Because I would imagine that's the spirit of it.
I think
Well, that's okay. Go ahead, Ann.
No, I was just agreeing.
I'm wondering if we could word it in some way like examples of participating or fostering, you could say fostering the literary arts in diverse communities.
You know what we can do? You know what we can do? So, oh, sorry. So one of the things that Castro did, he wrote, or he edited the volume Crossing the Divide, right? A volume of works from poets from different walks of life. And the whole idea was to kind of create this community. That was one of his things. One of his goals as the poet laureate was to kind of foster a community that is as diverse as St. Louis actually is, but we can all come together around these literary arts practices. And so maybe we use that as a historical example to kind of capture what we mean by diversity. Any thoughts there?
So yeah, because that would actually make it more expansive than readings, presentations, and diverse communities. That would or teaching, sorry, or because it would also be involve publishing.
Yeah.
So so maybe the second bullet could say examples of fostering the literary arts in diverse communities without it necessarily being specifically participating in an event, right?
Yeah.
That example is not an event.
Yeah, it was also part of if I recall, like a reading series, and he was intentional about who he asked to present their poems. So in a sense, the event itself became a reflection of his intention with the volume, with the anthology, right?
Mhm.
So I guess it goes back to the original point because I think like as a black poet, um, I've been in spaces that I would not consider black. As a cisgender poet, I've been in spaces that I would not consider heteronormative. So I can understand why it's necessary to talk about diversity in those ways. I can also imagine um, why it's necessary in terms of the values that we want to put out there. But like speaking in those spaces, I mean, I guess speaking in those spaces would have to be enough. I mean, how much more can we ask a person to do to demonstrate their willingness to speak in diverse spaces or to share works in diverse spaces and in diverse ways in diverse communities? I'm sorry, I'm having a moment of reflection here as I try to think about like what would that mean for the poet, who for whatever reason has not been invited or felt welcomed in spaces where there were people that didn't look like that individual. I mean, that is a
Mhm.
thing for St. Louis. I mean, part of our history is of the deep cultural divides of segregation. And some people, imagined or real, don't necessarily feel like they're invited or welcome in certain spaces. So if they never did because of these cultural factors, then what's fair to them? And how will we think about that? How might we rate something like that? Anyways, I'm just offering as fodder, something to think about as we
You
hit
know,
450.
yeah, I get what you're saying, MK, and I think that the way if we say as evidenced by, and it doesn't mean that they have to cover every single point.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, but if they do have an example of doing what we've just been talking about, like Dr. Castro did, that would be a great example.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and it could give them the opportunity to put something in their narrative about their belief or their value system as such.
Yep.
I wonder if you might consider something like examples of fostering the literary arts in diverse communities or challenges you've experienced
Mm.
in, um, like wanting to undertake those efforts, but not feeling like you were included. That's not the way it needs to be said, but if that makes any sense.
I
And
guess
so
where
the
I trip up is like sometimes as we talk about these things, I think we're making them probably more subjective than they have to be because I wonder how do we score that? How if we're my assumption is that if we're saying it here, then there's some sort of numerical value that we intend to later assess to these categories. And so to your point, your example, MK, if they haven't felt welcome, if they haven't been invited in those spaces, then what numerical value do we associate with that
there's
experience?
no right, there's no numerical value because really, regardless
Yeah.
of because really what I'm talking about is also something subjective. They think
Mm,
they haven't been invited. That's how they define reality. That's not necessarily the truth. There may have been an extension, there might have been an invitation, but it's how they capture that in their resume or how they might capture it in their statement. You know what I mean? And so there's no way to assess it. It's more like to your point, either you did or you didn't.
Yeah.
And so have you had these experiences or have you not?
yeah, I think that for me, some of this feels like more interview things we can parse out rather than because if when you put it on the website, it makes it feel a little more real, like I must have, or and even if we say as evidence by or examples of, I mean, kind of we're saying this is the criteria in which you're being judged against.
Mhm.
And so I think we have to be specific in saying this is the criteria and then this is the score in association with that. Everything else, the fuzziness within the conversations are going to come out through the interviews with our three semifinalists. But some of this I wonder if we're making it more work for ourselves to try to figure all this out in the 1 week that we have of assessing one candidate over another in a fair way.
I concur. What's the remedy then? How might we approach it?
I think the conversation is healthy. I think the things that we've been talking about, I think we just need to keep in mind what we're trying to accomplish maybe in this call. Is it parsing out more of the criteria so that we have examples to then go do a scoring rubric? Or however we want the outcome to be. Because I do think we've made a lot of progress in just discerning what this means. But now it's like, okay, how do we measure it? How do we count? Even in, again, the subjective stuff that comes out in the interviews, how do we be more clear on the website so people know what they're being graded against?
Fair point. Hey, Ann, go ahead.
Now this might be completely crazy, and Christine might want to kill me for saying this, but what if we chew on all of this, because we've had some robust conversation, come back next Monday with the final scoring rubric, and then push our timeline for publication for the nomination process opening to that Monday, the 17th? Or
No,
is that too close to the March 7 deadline?
we won't be meeting next Monday because
Oh,
of
that's right.
President's Day.
Never
So
mind.
we're effectively kicking it down the road for
Got
2
it.
weeks.
Okay.
And so,
Thank you.
so no, but I think you're right. I mean, it would be good to give this conversation a breather, right? To be able to kind of mull it over a bit, but continue to do the work of the rubric design this week in a shared space. Honestly, I think we can accomplish it because we got a lot of the big ideas out of the way. And it sounds like, and again, Nick, please correct me if I'm wrong, the conversation about diverse communities, if we ask them instances or make sure that they include instances uh, of speaking in diverse settings, and then let it be. And then that way, whether or not, to me, it feels more like, has this person done it or not? you know,
And that
that,
to me is, I mean, sometimes it comes out, you can see it in their work that
yeah.
they're either very women focused or blackety black or whatever the case may be. You can kind of see it come out and see what spaces they may be in. But then also, if it's still a question mark, then we just ask it in the interview.
Right now, but to your point
Yeah.
about elevating this person to the semifinalist, that
Oh,
means they
okay.
have to clear this particular bar. So
Yeah.
it sounds more like a checkbox. Have you done something like this, right? Or
Yeah.
have you demonstrated that you've done this before? And then that's it. Would that be adequate to say, just give us an example of poetic work in
I
a
didn't understand that. Sorry,
yeah.
my phone's listening.
Okay. Uh, but is that adequate to be able to offer that? Pam, you have a hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think like if we have this word in such a way that it's, examples such as where it's
Mhm.
clear that this is not an absolute where it's, this is just examples of evidence where they can also come up with things beyond our bullet points.
Sure.
I don't think it becomes quite the box for us or for them, right? Like
Okay.
it's a little more open than that. I mean, part of the goal, I think, of putting these examples up here is just so that people have a sense of like, oh, this is the kind of thing I could put up there. I have this other thing that's not exactly the same, but I bet I could make it fit. And also, I mean, a smart creative person who's the kind of person we want to be in this position could also say, I'm gonna actually, go against, what it says here and talk about why I haven't been able to enter those spaces. I mean, that's a person who takes initiative, and to me at least, that would be something that I would probably score highly, to see that initiative in terms of responding to it. So I think it's just a matter of making sure that it's worded in such a way where it's not just checking a box.
Okay. That's fair. So then perhaps the language then is, for example, speaking at cultural or sharing a poem at a cultural or ethnic event. because there's
Mhm.
plenty of those, right? Whether we're talking about parades, whatever sort of days. I mean, there's plenty of those throughout, and we don't have to be specific because I'm wondering because I mean, there's so many events that if we begin to like detail a type of diverse event, I feel like that might talk about being in a box. I feel like that boxes as well. But I don't know. What are your thoughts in this last minute before we close this thing out? Because obviously we're going to consider this and do online work and circle back online. Any final thoughts on that? I don't know. I know. This is the work. And once we have this done, we can trust the rubric. Once we because with all the thought that we've put into this, we can trust the rubric has done the work necessary to be able to create our list of finalists. Because obviously, if we're talking about Likert scale, we're likely going to go with the highest average and then kind of elevate that and have further discussion from there. So we'll talk about process as well. But I mean, ultimately, scoring highest average, listing though of those averages, final conversation to round out the semifinalists, and then done. But in the interim, Christine will be so kind as to take these thoughts, put them in a format, and then we're going to iron them out via email. Is that fair? All we can do is try. If we fail, we fail. But all we can do is try.
I will get this out to everyone in after the board meeting tomorrow. And Pam, are you okay with a Word doc if I send
Yeah.
it to you that way? Okay, I'll do that. And then I don't know if you are all interested, but the other thing you had on the agenda was setting aside time that all of your schedules were compatible during the time that you're going to be doing interviews. Obviously, it doesn't have to be every day, but you had suggested March 24th through April 4th for interviewing semifinalists.
Again, personally, I'm fine with that. Um, is it possible for us to maybe just block the time on our respective calendars and then list that in an email so that we can find alignment there? Can we possibly do that?
Yeah, I can, when I share the very drafty draft of the rubric, I can suggest some times and see who has what compatible time. It would just be nice for you all to have that on your schedules already, so you don't have to worry about it. So maybe a few different times.
For sure. For sure.
Okay,
Any,
I'll do that.
any, sorry. So thank you so much for that, Christine. Any other thoughts before we close out? Well, I do appreciate your time and your willingness to go over by a minute so that we can get this important work done. We're close. We're so close. Let us adjourn. So let's if there's no announcements, no other thoughts, then we can move to adjournment. Do I need a
Just quickly a first and a second.
cool? Can I get a motion for adjournment?
I move to adjourn.
A second.
All right. It has been motioned and seconded. Thank you very much for your time. We'll look for the email.